Coach Teresa Ford here, and this is the Guiding You Home podcast. This is a thought-provoking and often humorous approach to moving you closer to the only one who can genuinely help you live a life of abundance and prosperity. Sound good? Yeah, it's you that needs to go within so you can sit in the driver's seat of your life, co-creating with God. So make room for more light and knowledge. As you continue to listen, you will discover elements of how to lead with your inner light, how to act on your specific promptings, and how to follow your spiritual intuition so you can fulfill the measure of your creation. Thanks for being here, and let's dive in. Hello. Are you ready to get started? We are talking today about learning to respond as your higher self in the face of fear. And the most important reason to do that is to understand that you are in control. Oh my goodness, when we're out of control, we feel like Controlzilla. We're just upset that other people aren't meeting our demands or acting appropriately or agreeing with us in the right way. And we find ourselves just frustrated and a little bit bitter and angry and all the negative emotions. And if you've learned nothing else in these podcast episodes, is that emotions matter. So if you want to have the best life ever, we have got to learn how to act in the face of fear as our higher selves. So there's so much in this world to be fearful of. Like, there's not really such thing as getting through life unless you're Gandhi without feeling fear. And I'm sure he felt fear at some point too. But oftentimes we try and control the outcomes when we're in fear. I was chatting with a friend the other day, and we were talking about her life situation and that she had a lot of fear around a family member, not because that family member was harmful, but rather that the family member might stumble into harm of themselves. And my friend was just worried, which is fear, right? Worry is fear. It's not against the law, but it's definitely not helping us have our best life either. So she was just worried. And we talked about it. I said, okay, so you're trying to control outcomes with your worry. That is the only reason to worry, is you're trying to control an outcome because you feel helpless to do something about it. And as we were talking about that, I was like, well, what would you rather do? I mean, because worry is a lot of energy out the window. That's an investment you're never going to get back. So if you're investing all your energy into worry, are you living in the best life, or do you want improvement? And the only reason to operate from that standpoint is that we are telling ourselves a story that has something to do with our past. Some of us have rather dramatic pasts, chaotic pasts, and traumatic pasts. Some of us had great pasts, but we've come across a few surprises in our lives. And so there's something we're telling ourselves when we are trying to control the outcomes that is less than our true self, our inner self, our spiritual self, our inner guidance. However you want to say it, it's that thing inside of us that makes our arms and legs move and our brain think. It makes our heart beat, right? So whatever your higher consciousness is, whatever you want to call it, I call it God, I call it spirit, and I call it inner guidance. So I believe that those are three key components to understanding how to act as your higher self, because if you're really not acquainted with that person, then it's going to be more difficult to tap into a higher sense of peace or safety or knowing that everything's going to be okay if you're just shooting from anxiety and depression and pain, right? So when we are controlling the outcomes, we are our lower self when we're facing fear. And so I asked my friend, I was like, do you want to be in the face of fear and be a Controlzilla, or do you want to be in the face of fear and show up with love in your heart? Which one feels heavier? And she actually was very honest. She said, love feels harder because you just want to, grip onto things real tight when you're in fear. Like, why would you go to love? That feels like you might not care, you would give up, or that you're trying to check out. You're avoiding the actual situation. You're not looking at reality. And I thought that was an interesting perspective, and we're all going to have them. We're all going to have a different perspective on this because we all have different life backgrounds, upbringings, conditioning, experiences, relationships, etc. Okay, so we got to leave lots of room open to think about this and how it's going to work for you. So when she said that, I was like, okay, you're right. I mean, if you really have never experienced choosing love in the face of fear, then the natural knee-jerk reaction is to try and control outcomes. Try not to let somebody harm themselves. Try not to let somebody, and this is not somebody that's depressed, this is somebody that's declining in years, right? So harming themselves would be certainly not their intent, but maybe unavoidable in their aging years. So the worry is not going to change aging. The worrying is not going to change an accident. So if worrying, which is another form of controlling or focusing on what you don't want, if worrying is actually coming from fear and it's your lower self, then how much more could you offer to somebody if you were operating from your higher self? So love in the face of fear is an important choice to make when you're in the middle of something that maybe is scary to you. I know people that are terrible test takers and it's scary to them to take tests. I know people who have narcissists in their life and it's scary for them to think about leaving. I know people that are socially shy and it's scary for them to leave the house and join a group. So if you've got fear about something, which we all do, no one's going to get out of this life without experiencing fear on some level, then it's important for you to make a choice, and oftentimes that choice needs to be made ahead of time. So when a moment of fear shows up, you'll have a game plan in your back pocket. I think that is key to choosing what to do in the face of fear. Okay, so first of all, make the choice ahead of time. I would rather operate from my loving adult self rather than maybe my wounded child self, who would want to try and control everything even though they felt powerless to do anything to change. I mean, does that make sense? Like, if you've had a wounded child within you for all these years, there was many times the way that child got wounded was to feel helpless, right? So that's where control comes from, is feeling helpless. So even if you had a great childhood, if there's times that you want to be Controlzilla because you feel helpless, there is a wounded child in there somewhere. There's a wound. There's some pain. Okay, and and we're not saying it was your parents. We're not saying it was the people you loved. We're saying that something happened somewhere along the line between age 0 and now that left a wound. Okay, so there's got to be a purpose behind the choice you're making, though, right? So if you're trying to get out of pain, the get word, that's a taking word. That's trying to extract something that's not being offered, right? So if somebody is trying to be controlling, then it's very difficult for them to actually get what they want or avoid pain because they're trying to take it. They're trying to extract it, and you can never really achieve. If you believe in the law of attraction, you cannot attract what you're wanting with the word get, with the intention, the purpose of get. I want to get something, I want to get safety for me by controlling somebody else and where they live and how they live so that they won't put themselves in jeopardy. I want to get something. I want them to change so I can feel better. That's never really going to happen because that's codependency, that's an illness, that's unhealth, that's mental illness. So if you're the only person that you can control and you choose to operate from your loving higher self, then the purpose you're doing that for is to give, not to get, but to give love to yourself and others, to find ways to check in with yourself. Why are you feeling fear in the first place? First of all, giving yourself that kind of understanding is super powerful. Understand why you're in fear. If that fear is standing in front of an audience, where did you pick up the idea that that was going to be scary? There is an inner child in there somewhere inside of you that is receiving the message that you might be judged, or that you might fail, or it might not be perfect, or it might be not good enough. There is a wound there, and taking personal responsibility for that emotion is super, super important if you want to heal, if you want to face fear with love. So, learning that the reason you're choosing love is to give something to yourself. You can't give it to others if you haven't given it to yourself. It's going to fall on deaf ears. It's going to be hollow. So you're really doing this for yourself before you can ever do it for somebody else. But eventually you will be able to do this for other people, showing up for them. I have probably mentioned, I'm not sure, I have a couple of podcasts, but my daughter had a time in her life when she called me at 3:00 in the morning and her house was burning down. And I'm not laughing because it burned down. I'm laughing because, holy smokes, first of all, that is just a sudden thing that you have to find yourself jumping out your window in the middle of the night. But second of all, I'm so grateful that I was in a place in my life where I didn't make her emergency my emergency. She was already in enough fear. And she called me and was crying, "Mom, my house is burning down." And I knew ahead of time. It was like, first of all, I have had enough experiences in my life to know that if I were to choose love in the face of fear, things are going to go so much better than if I were to try and control things. If I were to have tried to control things, I would have tried to fix the emotions she was having. I would try and stop her from crying, or, just normalize our conversation, and it would be probably ineffective. It probably would have been very ineffective if I had done that, because I couldn't control her, but I could control me, which is choosing love in the face of fear. I chose, what do I want? What's my outcome on this phone call? And I had to think of that ahead of time, only because I didn't know our house was going to burn down. I don't know the emergencies that are going to come up in the future, but I had to know that I wanted to be a calming influence in my family and friends' lives. So if that was my intent, I had to do the work inside of me to learn to love me and take responsibility for my own pain and my own joy. I had to do that work. But in this case, because I had done that work, I was able to stay calm and recognize what was going well, because my daughter really couldn't see it at the time. And neither would you. Neither would I, probably, when you have this sudden disaster put upon you. But I was able to say, "You're okay, right?" And she's like, "Yes." "And you're in a safe place, right?" And she said, "Yes." "And there's nothing you can do right now except get yourself to a hotel, call your insurance company, and wait for the police report, because they're not letting you back in tonight." If I hadn't done the inner work and taken responsibility for my own pain, I, being an empath also, and a number 2 on the Enneagram, who is the helper, I would have been controlzilla all over the place, trying to protect her from pain, me from pain, and not, avoiding the responsibility for feeling it, or, trying to take away her right to feel the way she wanted to feel about it. Just to, put everything back at the status quo, because I hate conflict. I didn't want anyone to be unhappy. If I hadn't done the work, you can tell it would not have gone well. And probably she wouldn't have thought to call me. If I had been somebody she didn't trust to stay calm by that point in my life, she probably wouldn't have called me anyway, because she probably would have known it would have been more upsetting to me than helpful to her. So, can you see how you can be such a benefit to others if you do this work for you? And so, knowing that you have a desire, I really do want to be the higher self. I do want to act from that loving place inside of me. Then that finding joy and peace and safety and lovability and worth internally is so important to do in advance. To do it before the next emergency arises, the next fearful thing shows up, the next thing that you're like, I should push myself outside my comfort zone, but I don't dare because you haven't made that connection with your inner self, your higher self. Okay, so your intent is super, super important. You've got to have an intent to learn from your pain. And it's a little bit ironic that the times that we learn the most is from pain. So that's why it's okay to have the pain. It's okay to feel what you feel. The only problem is when it turns into controlling behavior. That means you're not taking responsibility for the fear that you feel. If you take responsibility for the fear that you feel, you're going to sit back in a moment where you feel rejection is imminent or abandonment is imminent. You're going to sit back and go, hang on. The inner child in me is starting to cry. My pain is showing up, and I am wanting to avoid it like crazy. I want to go apologize, say I'm sorry, let's work things out. I'm trying to backpedal so that the thing that I fear the most, whether it's rejection or judgment or social anxiety or whatever it is, that thing that you want to avoid at all costs and avoid your personal feelings about it is the thing that we're going to learn from the most. Our education comes from the way we feel. Our education comes from looking at why we feel the way we feel. Pain is an indicator that there's something we haven't taken full responsibility for. One of my highest negative emotions to carry around with me is shame. Shame, woo! I tell you, it took me years and years and years, and I'm not saying I don't still feel shame, but it took me years and years and years to work on this. It's like, why do I feel shame? Is that a shameful thing? Did I do something to be ashamed of? I even had counselors, therapists tell me when they were questioning why I was in their office because I was complaining about my relationship and wondering why it wasn't working, they literally said, shame on you. And I was like, oh, excuse me, I think I'm in the wrong office. Because somebody that understands me would never, ever say that. And I was there to be understood, which was not taking responsibility for my emotions. I wanted them to tell me that I was okay, that I was worthy, that I was good enough. And that they weren't there to do that. And right or wrong for saying that to somebody who was already in pain, luckily, I was thick-skinned enough that it just kind of almost was like a flash going through my brain where I'm like, whoop, you're in the wrong office. You need to get out of here. You're not getting anywhere. You're wasting your time. And so I went and did this work on my own through, much research and lots of resources. And I couldn't even name all of them. I can tell you that it started with a few mentors of mine that lived in my local neighborhood, and I would just watch like a fly on the wall. It's like, how are they being a good mother? What are they doing? How come they don't seem to be in pain? What are they doing different than I'm doing? And then that was back in the, 90s. And that's when Brene Brown's book first came out. So I did read that, and wiping my brow every page that I turned, I was like, whew, it's not just me, because she was all talking about shame. And shame is a product of fear. And I was taught that rejection and abandonment were imminent in my life. And so, and there was a lot of shaming going on also behind the scenes, gaslighting, shaming, you name it, in order to try and control me, because my parents' greatest fear was looking bad in public. They wanted to look like the perfect parents so nobody could see their shame and their pain. So, you can see that pattern trickle down. And if you're somebody that's experienced that, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, oh, but why do I carry this guilt and shame around with me all the time from my parents? Why can't I just get rid of it? And here's the good news. You can get rid of it, but you have to learn to take responsibility for your own pain. So once upon a time, there was a time in my life where avoiding embarrassment that my relationship wasn't good was huge. And so out in public, it was a real show. It's like, wow, we pulled out all the stops. And behind the scenes, it was not like that. There were yelling and screaming matches and lots of pain back and forth. In those times, I knew that when I was that elevated in my pain, that it was not my higher self. I knew that, and I was actually ashamed of acting that way, knowing that there was something better in me to be presented in that moment of fear that I was going to get rejected or abandoned. But the good news is that I started asking myself a question. What do you want? What do you need? You're acting like a raving lunatic. What do you need? And that's when I started realizing there was a little child voice, very tiny, very small, very quiet inside of me that would answer back. And it took me years to hear it. But it started out as a sense, turned into a feeling. It worked its way into an audible language, and it came forward in a very powerful, emotional way. I just want to be loved. It was very quiet and subtle, but all those years as it started to get louder and louder and louder, and I became less satisfied with my getting upset and being in fear all the time and trying to control the outcomes, that I started hearing what my inner child was begging me for. Just love me. But I was seeking that through control on the outside of me. I wanted to be accepted and loved and valued by everybody else so I wouldn't have to. That was a pivotal moment for me when I had that very thought. I was like, oh my gosh, I want everyone else to do it so I don't have to, because I don't think it's possible. I don't think I am lovable. I don't think I am worthy of love. Like, I think that's selfish. I think that's, you need to suck it up and work harder to be loved. You need to try to be loved. You need to earn love. Those were all the false beliefs that I believed were true growing up. And I took them into my adult years. I took them into my mothering, and I, unfortunately, spent a lot of years teaching my kids the same falsehoods about earning love. That love is a compliment. You're going to have to work hard to get one from me. And it's exactly what I had to do to get one from my mother. So when I was turning this around, it wasn't actually too late for me. I turned it around probably mid-mothering, between my older kids and my youngest kids. And especially, I turned it around for myself after mothering. So learning to love and take responsibility for your own pain and joy is asking your inner child, what do you want? What do you want? You've got to open your heart and open yourself up to the possibilities of what that looks like. You want to be valued, you want to be seen, you want to be understood. What is it that you want when you're in the throes of controlling the outcomes because you're in the face of fear? You've got to ask yourself, what am I telling myself? Am I telling myself that you're unlovable and you're going to have to work hard? Am I telling my inner child who already feels helpless to take away anyone else's pain that they need to earn love? They need to be better? They need to be more pleasing? That they need to, be satisfied with what little pickings of love they get, that they don't get to get a bunch of love, they can only have a little bit of love? Like, what is the story? You're telling yourself a story. I was telling myself a story. We tell ourselves these stories, and it brings out the worst in us. But if we could dialogue with that inner child, that wounded self, and explore the origin of the pain. Where did I learn that? That falsehood that I have believed all these years is true, and somewhere inside of me kept telling me that is not true. That can't possibly be true. To look outside of yourself and try and get everyone else to love you because you're trying, you're efforting, you're earning, it's never going to happen. It's not their job to love you. We got to look to the inside. That's where the work is done. You got to go back to that inner child and tell her, in the face of fear, it's okay. You're not responsible for everyone else's unhappiness. It's okay. You're lovable, you always have been, and it's in stone. You can't undo it, so stop trying. You got to have that dialogue with that inner child. You are valuable. You don't need to work hard. You don't need to earn it. You don't need to do anything other than be still right now. That just gives the inner child so much more confidence. It's like, really? Am I still going to be loved? Am I still going to be okay? I'm still going to be valuable even if I'm not trying really hard, even if I'm not trying to control the outcomes? Yes. The answer is yes. Just in case you were wondering what to tell your inner child, the answer is yes. They don't have to try. It's okay. You are not responsible for the outcomes. You're not responsible for other people's feelings. You can let them have their feelings. It's okay. The only thing you can be responsible for is your own pain, and that pain is information. It's there to tell you that there is something more that needs attention inside of you. So you got to check in. Why do I feel like I'm about to be abandoned? Is that a bad thing? Would that be me opting out of an unhealthy relationship? Would that be me opting out of an unhealthy environment? Maybe that's a good thing. But if your brain is telling your inner child, you're not going to find love anywhere else, you better take this while you can get it, and then you beg to keep an unhealthy relationship as part of who you are and your life, yeah, that's going to be a disaster, and you know it. But you got to talk to the inner child, almost like visually taking that inner child's hand and walking them out of the middle of traffic to a safe place on the sidewalk. It's like, don't worry, I got you. You're not going to be abandoned. You're not in danger. Because the danger, feeling like you're going to get hit by a car or something, that's what, abandonment feels like. That's what being fired at work feels like. That's what losing a relationship where you've invested your entire self, your entire identity into your work or your relationship with a significant other. It feels like you just walked out into oncoming traffic, and it's scary. But you've got to take your adult self, your adult brain. There is an adult brain there somewhere that is not part of the wounded child. Needs to take hold of the wounded child's hand and walk them out of traffic, out of danger, over to the sidewalk, kneel down, get on their level, and ask them, what do you need? How old are you? Because you were a certain age when that fear was first put in you. You were a certain age, and you were probably acting that way. When I was screaming and yelling in my relationship as an adult, that person was about 5 years old, and she was trying to get her mother's attention, to see her and validate her. That child that wanted to be loved, the earliest memory I have was at 3 years old, of wanting to be loved and being a little confused as to why asking for a hug was a bad thing. So there is a knowing inside of you of how old you were when you first had that same pain that you're recognizing within yourself as an adult. He or she is a certain age. Get down on his or her level and ask, how old are you? What do you think is going to happen right now? What was the fear in the first place? And then confirm you're okay now, and you'll be okay, even if it's just second by second. I'll stand here with you this second, and I will stand with you this second. And it's going to be okay as we work our way through the pain and take responsibility for how we feel, because nobody else is going to do this work for you. You've got to be your own support system. You have to be your own safety net. You have to be your own loving energy. You have to be your own encourager. You need to be the person that checks in with you to take responsibility for the pain and to listen to your inner guidance system and trust your intuition. You've got to learn to trust yourself all over again, because we spend so much time out there looking, hoping, wishing somebody is going to pay attention to us and give us good advice, or give us loving attention, or understand us, or see us for who we are and what we do. It's never going to happen. It's actually unhealthy if that does happen. It's unhealthy. But when you are sure of who you are, you're confident, you do take responsibility for your pain and your joy, I should say, and you're connecting with your true worth and finding that purpose of why you're choosing love in the face of fear, why your desire is to strengthen your inner connection, why your intent is learning to take responsibility, that you really do want to learn what it is that's still causing the pain. Everything changes. Then you can really be that person who shows up in a relationship and it doesn't drain you. There's no drama. The trauma doesn't rear its ugly head anymore. You can be in a work environment. You can go for the bigger job. You can get the raise. You can, step outside your comfort zone. You can stand in front of the crowd. You can, join in on social events. Like, there's nothing you can't do when you learn to connect with your inner self. Especially, you'll learn how to do that in the face of fear. That's where courage is encouraged. That would have been a better title for this episode. Encouraging your courage. But hopefully you've formulated some of your own ideas as you've listened to this, that you're getting some understanding that there's some work in you to be done. There is some lovability to be embraced within you, some worthiness inside of you, some desire to be of value to others. But you could only really do that and do it consistently when you've already done the work inside of you. So if you really want to operate from your higher self in the face of fear, you got to decide now this is the time. I really want to come from my higher self, my loving self, and I want to show up for me. That's the person you're working on right now. And it's good to also make that choice, like if there's something come up in my life. And thanks for listening. I invite you to leave your feedback and share your aha moments as you listen to this podcast. Also, you can access more information or any of the programs, courses, or worksheets that I've mentioned on these episodes on my website at teresaford.life. Or what I would really love is for you to connect with me on Instagram at teresaford.coaching and on Facebook at Coaching with Teresa Ford, so I can give you more interesting insights and further coaching to help you fulfill the measure of your creation.